So hand in hand with adding fields and creating new fields, we want to talk about deleting fields. And like you were saying, John, this also includes renaming fields or even changing the attributes of fields, say changing a required field to not be required. That all of that happens outside of your DevOps. And while we like to mirror the content types or the content models as objects a lot of times in our code, it's not a one-to-one sort of way that it's done. So just overall, deletion is hard. It is hard to do. If I delete a field, I need to remove all references to that anywhere that I have it in code so that my DevOps doesn't break. And that's a very difficult thing to do. It's easier if I already assumed it was null. But my second part of this, it would be, can you just hide it? It might be easier to just hide that thing. It's not like we're trying to save space here. It could be that you're trying to save space. So if you're deleting a field that had, megabytes and megabytes of data and you want to save on your API usage, things like that, I can see how that might be a concern. And we want to wipe all references to that field from our code. That's a good reason to delete things. Other than that, I would say, just hide it. That's probably the easier way. Hide it in the back end. We don't think about it anymore, and maybe annotate that in your code or deprecate it. And then over time, we'll look at removing the instance of it in your code.
Yeah, sometimes, Joel, we roll that out, right? So we do, let's hide it for now. We're assuming it's been removed from all of our development code and is not being pulled, but it's still there temporarily. And then, after, X number of time, you kind of go back and you're like, we verified, we've tested, which is this third item, is just making sure that these things are not pulling that content. And if you feel confident, then you can start removing those fields directly from the content model. But this gets really tricky as well when you have fields that are required or have other validation, because you can't just hide a required field, because then when you add new content to that list, you can't populate that field and it's required. So once you get into required fields and trying to delete them or get rid of them, it really gets tricky. You really have to plan out how to do this. And so this comes back to, why are you deleting a field in the first place? It was part of that content model. Did that content model, that content not become valuable anymore? It's very rare, actually, that we see you have to delete a field unless you're migrating your content to a completely different model. And in some cases, what we tell people to do is take your model, copy it, and remodify that, and copy the content over. And then when you're coding, you can actually change your references to that new location, because sometimes it's a lot easier to just point something to a new model and very, very accurately test whether it's calling the old model or not through your code or through different systems, because you can kind of monitor whether it's calling certain models a lot easier than you can calling certain field.
Well, and that brings into mind, John, what folks have started doing too is when they're looking at making major changes to their content model, a lot of the times they'll clone their entire, from agility point of view, they'll clone their entire instance, which we've started enabling using a CLI. Clone the entire instance to a new instance, do a bunch of changes on it, work against that as like a sandbox or sort of a test environment, and then come back to their production instance and then do those changes there. And that's just a way of sort of testing in a development environment first. But obviously, we need to test all code on all the environments, and that might be on multiple apps too, right? If this content is being pulled in to multiple places, we need to test it everywhere. So
multi-channel is really, really tough on this one. Yeah.